The desperate sound of a child gasping for air cut through the peaceful afternoon at Oak Ridge Park, turning Mason Lawson's blood cold. He'd been pushing his 5-year-old daughter Emma on the swing set when he spotted the little boy across the playground, his face turning an alarming shade of red as he clutched at his throat. "Emma, stay right here," Mason instructed firmly, already sprinting across the playground. The boy's nanny stood frozen in shock, frantically patting the child's back to no effect. Mason didn't hesitate. In 3 long strides, he reached them, his construction worker's hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I know the Heimlich." "Let me help," Mason said, his voice calm despite the emergency. The nanny stepped aside immediately, tears streaming down her face. Mason positioned himself behind the small boy, who couldn't have been more than 4, wrapped his arms around the tiny frame, and performed the maneuver with precision. 1 thrust, 2 thrusts, and on the third, a hard candy shot from the child's mouth, landing on the rubber playground surface. The boy drew in a ragged breath, then began to sob, color flooding back into his pale cheeks. Mason knelt beside him, his hand gently rubbing the boy's back. "You're okay now, buddy. Take deep breaths. That's it. Ethan," a woman's panicked voice called out as she ran toward them from the park entrance. "Ethan?" Mason looked up to see a striking woman in her early 30s racing toward them. Her chestnut hair whipped behind her, designer sunglasses pushed atop her head, and even in her obvious distress, there was something magnetic about her presence. She dropped to her knees beside the boy, gathering him into her arms. "What happened? Maria, what happened?" She demanded of the nanny, who was still trembling. "He was choking, madam. This man saved him," Maria explained, gesturing toward Mason. The woman turned to Mason, her emerald eyes locking with his. "You saved my son," her voice cracked with emotion. "Just did what anyone would do," Mason said, rubbing the back of his neck self-consciously. He was acutely aware of his worn jeans and faded t-shirt in contrast to her obviously expensive attire. "Daddy," Emma's voice called out as she ran over, her blonde pigtails bouncing. "You said to stay on the swing, but you were gone a long time." Mason scooped up his daughter. "Sorry, princess, this little boy needed help." The woman was still staring at him, her son now hiccuping softly against her shoulder. "I'm Elena Blackwell," she said, extending her hand. "And I don't know how to thank you for saving Ethan." "Mason Lawson," he replied, shifting Emma to his hip to shake Elena's hand. "And no thanks necessary, I'm just glad I was here. I want to properly express my gratitude. Please let me take you both to dinner," Elena insisted. Mason hesitated. Dinner with this clearly wealthy woman seemed like stepping into another world one he didn't belong in. "That's really not necessary. Please," Elena said, her eyes sincere. "It would mean a lot to me, to us," she added, kissing the top of Ethan's head. Emma tugged at Mason's shirt. "Can we, Daddy, please?" Mason couldn't resist his daughter's pleading eyes. "All right," he conceded with a small smile. "Dinner would be nice." What Mason Lawson didn't know then was that Elena Blackwell wasn't just any grateful mother. She was one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs, with a net worth in the millions. And as she watched him comfort his daughter while exchanging phone numbers, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of genuine interest in a man who seemed to care more about people than possessions. Mason tucked Emma into bed that evening, his mind still replaying the afternoon's events. "Daddy, is the little boy going to be okay?" Emma asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Yes, sweetheart." "His name is Ethan, and he's fine now," Mason assured her, smoothing her blonde hair back from her forehead. "We're going to have dinner with him and his mom tomorrow." "The pretty lady?" Emma asked with a knowing smile that seemed beyond her years. Mason chuckled. "Yes, the pretty lady. Her name is Elena." After reading Emma her favorite bedtime story, Mason settled on his worn couch, laptop balanced on his knees as he reviewed his finances. Construction work had been steady, but raising a child alone was expensive, especially with Emma starting kindergarten in the fall. The medical bills from his late wife's illness still loomed large, though he'd made significant progress in the 3 years since her passing. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you again for today. Ethan is asking about the hero man and his princess." Looking forward to dinner tomorrow. Elena Mason smiled despite himself, then replied, just glad I could help. Emma's excited too, see you tomorrow. The next evening, Mason found himself standing outside Bella Vita, an upscale Italian restaurant he'd passed many times but never considered entering. He'd put on his only decent button-down shirt and had helped Emma into her favorite purple dress. Do I look pretty, Daddy? Emma asked, twirling. The prettiest princess in the whole kingdom, Mason assured her, his heart swelling with love for his daughter, who somehow managed to radiate joy despite everything they'd been through. Elena spotted them from inside and waved, leading Ethan by the hand to meet them at the entrance. She wore a simple yet elegant blue dress that accentuated her eyes, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. I'm so glad you could make it, Elena said warmly, ushering them inside. Mason noted how the staff seemed to know her, addressing her by name and leading them to what was clearly the best table in the house, over breadsticks and sparkling water, and juice for the children. Conversation flowed surprisingly easily. Mason learned that Elena ran a successful tech company that developed educational software. She'd started it from her garage 7 years ago and had grown it into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. What about you? She asked, genuinely interested. What do you do when you're not saving children at parks? Mason smiled, breaking a breadstick in half. I'm a construction foreman. Nothing as impressive as running a company, but I enjoy the work. Building things that last, you know, that's incredibly important work, Elena said sincerely. My father was in construction. He always said he was leaving his mark on the skyline. As they talked, Ethan and Emma quickly bonded, drawing pictures on the kids' menus the restaurant provided. Mason noticed the way Elena watched the children with a soft expression, especially when Ethan laughed at something Emma said, a sound that, judging by Elena's reaction, wasn't commonplace. He hasn't laughed like that in months, Elena confided quietly when the children were distracted. His father and I divorced last year. It's been difficult for him. Mason nodded understandingly. Emma went through a tough time after her mom passed. Kids are resilient, but they need time. Elena's eyes widened slightly. I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. It's okay, Mason assured her. It's been 3 years, cancer. He swallowed hard. We're doing all right now, aren't we, princess? He added as Emma looked up at the sound of her name. Yep, Daddy makes the best pancakes ever on Saturdays, Emma declared, causing everyone to laugh. By the time dessert arrived, chocolate gelato that had both children grinning with chocolate-smeared faces, Mason found himself genuinely enjoying Elena's company. She was intelligent and passionate about her work, but more importantly, she listened when he spoke and showed genuine interest in his and Emma's lives. When the check arrived, Elena smoothly handed the waiter her card before Mason could even reach for his wallet. Please let me get this, Mason protested, uncomfortable with the imbalance. Elena's expression softened. Mason, you gave me something priceless yesterday. Let me at least buy you dinner. Their eyes met across the table, and Mason felt something shift between them, a connection that went beyond gratitude or casual interest. He nodded his acceptance, and Elena's answering smile made his heart skip a beat. As they said goodbye outside the restaurant, Elena surprised Mason by suggesting a playdate for the children that weekend. There's a great children's museum Ethan loves. Emma might enjoy it too. Can we, Daddy? Emma asked, bouncing on her toes. Mason looked from his excited daughter to Elena's hopeful expression. We'd like that, he agreed. Walking home, carrying a sleepy Emma, Mason couldn't help but wonder if he'd just stepped into something more significant than he'd anticipated. The warmth in Elena's eyes when she'd said goodbye lingered in his mind, along with the surprising ease he felt in her presence despite their different worlds. The children's museum date led to a picnic in the park the following week, which led to Elena and Ethan joining Mason and Emma for those famous Saturday pancakes. Before Mason quite realized what was happening, their lives had begun to intertwine. One evening in late June, about a month after their first meeting, Elena invited Mason to her home after the children had become inseparable during a day at the community pool. He'd been hesitant at first. He'd gathered that Elena was well off, but he wasn't prepared for the reality of her sprawling hillside home with its panoramic city views. "This is quite a place," Mason said, as Elena gave him a tour while the children played in a room that seemed dedicated entirely to toys and games. "It's too big, honestly," Elena admitted, leading him to the kitchen where she poured them each a glass of wine. "After the divorce, I considered moving somewhere smaller, but Ethan's school is nearby and—" She trailed off, shrugging. "It's a beautiful home," Mason said sincerely. They settled on her back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Elena turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something, Mason?" "Of course." "Does it bother you, my success, this house, all of it?" She gestured vaguely at their surroundings. Mason considered her question carefully. "I'd be lying if I said it wasn't intimidating at first," he admitted. "But no, it doesn't bother me. You've worked hard for what you have. What would bother me is if you thought less of me because I don't have the same." Elena reached across the space between them, placing her hand over his. "I think more of you, not less. You're the most genuine person I've met in years." The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through Mason. In that moment, with the city lights beginning to twinkle below them, he realized he was falling for Elena Blackwell wealth, success, and all. Their first kiss happened 2 weeks later, after they'd taken the children to a drive-in movie. Both kids had fallen asleep in the back seat on the drive home, and Mason had walked Elena to her door after carrying Ethan inside. "I should get Emma home," Mason said quietly, though he made no move to leave. Elena looked up at him, moonlight casting soft shadows across her face. "Or you could both stay. The guest room has 2 beds." Mason hesitated, not because he didn't want to stay, but because crossing this threshold felt significant. "I'm not very good at this," Elena admitted, her usual confidence faltering. "Dating as a single mom, I mean, but I like you, Mason. A lot." Mason reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I like you too, more than I expected to." When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home, gentle at first, then deeper, filled with weeks of growing feelings and unspoken longing. Mason pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. "We should probably take this slow," he whispered. "For the kids," Elena nodded, her eyes still closed. "Slow is good, but I still want you to stay tonight, just to sleep," she added with a small smile. That night, with Emma curled up in the guest room and Ethan in his own bed, Mason and Elena stayed up talking in her living room until the early hours of the morning. They shared stories of their pasts, Elena's drive to succeed after growing up with limited means, Mason's struggle to rebuild his life after losing his wife and dreams for their futures. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Mason and Emma began spending more weekends at Elena's house, and Mason found himself opening up to the possibility of love again in a way he hadn't thought possible after losing his wife. But their different worlds occasionally caused friction. When Emma's 5th birthday approached, Mason planned a simple party at their small apartment. "Why not have it here?" Elena suggested. "We could hire a princess character, get a bounce house for the backyard." "Elena, that's not necessary," Mason said firmly. "Emma doesn't need all that. She'll be happy with cake and her friends." "I know she doesn't need it," Elena replied, a hint of hurt in her voice. "I just thought it would be fun. Is this about money?" "Because I'd be happy to. It's not about the money," Mason cut her off, more sharply than he intended. "It's about raising my daughter with the right values. Not everything has to be extravagant." Elena stepped back, visibly stung. "I wasn't trying to overstep or suggest you're not giving her enough. I just wanted to do something nice." Mason sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. I'm sorry, it's just, I want to provide for her myself. I need to know I can give her what she needs." Understanding dawned in Elena's eyes. "This is about your pride." "Maybe a little," Mason admitted, "but it's also about teaching Emma that happiness doesn't come from things." In the end, they compromised. The party was held at Mason's apartment, with simple decorations and homemade cake, but Elena contributed by organizing a scavenger hunt that had all the children squealing with delight. Watching Elena help Emma open presents, her face alight with genuine joy at the child's excitement, Mason felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. "You okay?" Elena asked later, after the last guest had left and the children were playing with Emma's new toys. "Better than okay," Mason replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for today, for understanding what was important to me." Elena smiled up at him. "We make a good team, don't we?" "The best," he agreed, kissing her softly. As their relationship approached the 6-month mark, a new challenge arose. Mason's construction company won a bid for a major project, but it would require him to work longer hours temporarily. With Emma starting kindergarten and his babysitter's availability limited, he found himself in a difficult position. "I could help," Elena offered when he explained the situation one evening. "Ethan and Emma are at the same school now. Maria could pick them both up, bring them here until you're done." Mason hesitated. "I don't want to take advantage." Elena took his hands in hers. "Mason, let me be clear about something. I'm in love with you, with both of you," she added, glancing at Emma playing with Ethan in the next room. "Letting me help isn't taking advantage, it's letting me be part of your lives." Mason stared at her, processing her words. "You love me." Elena laughed softly. "That's what you took from all that." "Yes, I love you, Mason Lawson. Probably have since that day in the park when you saved my son without a second thought." Mason pulled her into his arms. "I love you too, have for months." Their arrangement worked beautifully. Emma thrived spending afternoons with Ethan, and Mason found that accepting Elena's help didn't diminish his role as a father, but rather enhanced their growing sense of family. One chilly November evening, Mason arrived at Elena's house to find the children already asleep and Elena waiting for him with a home-cooked meal. "You didn't have to do this," he said, touched by her thoughtfulness. "I wanted to. You've been working so hard." She led him to the dining room where candles flickered on the table. "Besides, we have something to celebrate." "We do," Elena nodded, excitement dancing in her eyes. "I got offered a chance to expand the company overseas. It would mean incredible growth potential, new markets." "Elena, that's amazing," Mason said sincerely, pulling her into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." "There's just one complication," she continued, looking suddenly nervous. "I'd need to go to London for 3 months to set everything up." Mason felt his heart sink. 3 months. "I've been thinking about it constantly," Elena said, taking his hands, "and I've come up with a solution, but it's a big step." "What kind of solution?" Elena took a deep breath. "Come with me, both of you." Emma could attend an international school for a semester. It would be an incredible experience for her. "And your project will be finished next month. You said yourself you were planning to take some time off." Mason sat down heavily. "Move to London for 3 months. Elena, my life is here." "Emma's school, my job." "I know it's a lot to ask," Elena said quickly. "And if it's too much, I understand. I could go alone, we could do the long-distance thing, but that's not what you want," Mason finished for her. "What I want is a life with you," Elena said softly. "With both of you, and with Ethan, I've never been more certain of anything." Mason looked at her, this remarkable woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly and changed it so completely. "Can I have some time to think about it?" Talk to Emma. "Of course," Elena nodded, though he could see the disappointment she tried to hide. Over the next week, Mason weighed the decision carefully. He discussed it with Emma, who was initially excited about the idea of living in a castle like a real princess, her understanding of England clearly influenced by her storybooks. "But what about my friends?" she asked, her little face scrunching with concern. "It would only be for a few months," Mason explained. "We'd come back, and you'd have Ethan there." Emma considered this seriously. "Would we all live together, like a family?" The question hit Mason with unexpected force. "Would you like that?" Emma nodded emphatically. "I like when we stay at Elena's, and Ethan is like my brother already, and—" She hesitated, suddenly shy. "Elena makes you smile like in the pictures with Mommy." Mason pulled his daughter into a tight hug, blinking back tears. "You're the smartest kid I know, you know that." The following weekend, Mason invited Elena to his apartment for dinner, a rare reversal of their usual routine. He'd spent the day cleaning and cooking, wanting everything to be perfect. "This is delicious," Elena commented, genuinely impressed by the lasagna he'd prepared. "You've been holding out on me, Lawson." "I have many hidden talents," he replied with a wink that made her laugh. After dinner, with the children engaged in a movie in the living room, Mason took Elena's hand and led her to the small balcony of his apartment. The view wasn't as spectacular as hers, but the night was clear, stars visible despite the city lights. "I've been thinking about London," he began. "And," Elena prompted, a hint of anxiety in her voice, "and I think it could be an amazing adventure for Emma, for both of us." Elena's face lit up. "Really? You'll come?" "On one condition," Mason said, his expression serious. "Anything." Mason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee. "I don't want to go as your boyfriend or as Emma's dad," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "I want to go as your husband, as part of a family, our family." He opened the box to reveal a ring not extravagant, but beautiful in its simplicity, with a single diamond set in white gold. "I know it's not as fancy as what you're used to," he began, but Elena cut him off, dropping to her knees in front of him. "It's perfect," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're perfect. Yes, Mason, yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then pulled her into a kiss that held all the promise of their future. A small sound from the doorway broke them apart. They turned to see Emma and Ethan watching them, eyes wide. "Does this mean we're going to be a real family?" Emma asked hopefully. Mason looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. "Yes, princess, if that's okay with you." Emma let out a squeal of delight and rushed forward, throwing her arms around them both. Ethan followed more cautiously. "Does that mean Mason will be my dad now?" he asked Elena quietly. Mason's heart clenched at the question. He reached out, drawing the boy into their circle. "If you want me to be, buddy, I'd be honored." Ethan studied him solemnly for a moment, then nodded once decisively. "I think my real dad would be okay with it. He doesn't visit much anyway." Elena made a choked sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her son close. "We're going to be okay, all of us," she whispered. They were married in a simple ceremony 2 weeks later, just before Christmas, with Emma as flower girl and Ethan as ring bearer. The London plan was adjusted. They decided to wait until summer, when Emma would be finished with kindergarten, and spend 6 months there as a family. Mason sold his apartment and moved into Elena's house, which quickly transformed from a showplace into a true home, with evidence of their blended family in every room, Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, Mason's tools in the garage, toy cars and princess dolls coexisting in the playroom. On their last night before leaving for London, Mason found Elena on the back deck, gazing at the same view they'd shared on that pivotal evening nearly a year earlier. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Elena leaned back against him, sighing contentedly. "Just thinking about how different my life was a year ago, how empty, even though I didn't realize it." Mason rested his chin on her shoulder. "If you had told me then that I'd be married to a brilliant, beautiful millionaire and taking my daughter to live in London, I'd have said you were crazy." Elena turned in his arms, her expression serious. "You know the money doesn't matter, right? I'd give it all up tomorrow if I had to choose between it and you." "I know," Mason said, and he did. In the month since they'd met, he'd come to understand that Elena valued him for exactly who he was: a dedicated father, a hard worker, a man of integrity. Just as he valued her not for her success, but for her kindness, her passion, and her love for their children. "Besides," he added with a grin, "I'm just using you for your private jet." Elena laughed and swatted his arm. "We're flying commercial, you dork. I've only chartered a private jet twice in my life." "Only twice? I'm disappointed. I expected more from my millionaire wife." Their teasing was interrupted by the children's voices calling for bedtime stories. Hand in hand, they went inside to tuck in their children, Emma first, then Ethan, a routine they'd established that made both children feel equally loved and secure. Later that night, lying beside Elena in the darkness, Mason reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. From that terrifying moment in the park when he'd seen a child choking to this, a full heart, a complete family, and a future brighter than he dared to imagine after losing his first wife. "What are you thinking about?" Elena murmured sleepily beside him. Mason pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. Just that sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them. MMM, Elena agreed, nestling against him. Like finding the love of your life while he's saving your child from choking on a candy. Exactly like that, Mason chuckled softly. Not the most romantic meet cute. I don't know, Elena said, her voice growing heavy with approaching sleep. Seems pretty perfect to me, my hero. As Elena's breathing deepened into sleep, Mason kissed her forehead gently. My love, he whispered, knowing with absolute certainty that fate, destiny, or simple good fortune had brought them together that day in the park, and whatever challenges lay ahead. They would face them together not as a struggling single father and a successful businesswoman, but as partners, equals in the thing that mattered most. The family they had built from love, trust, and the simple act of being there when needed most.